Good. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello. We're gonna get started here. So keep enjoying your lunch and nourish yourselves. And then we're gonna ease into this panel. We're gonna ease into it. We have some folks that will be joining us also on Zoom. It looks like, hopefully. All right. Welcome. I'm Ana Baptista. I'm going to be the moderator for this panel today. I am an associate professor at the New School University in New York City. Woo woo! I got a crew here today. And I'm also the director of a center called the Tishman Environment and Design Center. I'm also repping today a little bit the New Jersey EJ Alliance and Ironbound Community Corps, also in the house. Yeah, we brought New Jersey with us today. And I'm very honored to have these very esteemed panelists that are going to engage us all in a conversation about how we center justice in the work that we are doing together in building partnerships between multiple sectors, between higher education and the environmental justice and climate justice movements, also between government, philanthropy, labor, all the different movements that EJ has always been about. So a little bit of context about this panel. It's called Centering Justice. This panel comes out of a series of conversations in the last few years. Not just years, but probably many decades. We've seen an evolution of the environmental justice and climate justice movements, a growth and an expansion of not just movement organizations, but an interest, a growing interest in the topics of environmental justice, in the communities of environmental justice. I was telling Sofia earlier, can you have imagined 20 or 30 years ago walking around Yale campus talking about environmental justice? And we chuckled, because most back then in the 90s, even in the early 2000s, environmental justice was not a huge source of inquiry for academia, for scholarship. It was not taken seriously. I remember professors saying to me, that doesn't exist. Environmental racism, environmental justice, what is that? Prove it. And communities, environmental justice communities were marginalized from higher education, from the conversations that were happening in academia and in many spaces. And now, when you do a Google search for environmental justice and climate justice centers at universities, you will find hundreds, not dozens, hundreds of academic centers and institutes who have an explicit mention or connection point to environmental justice and climate justice. And it begs the question, how did we get here? On the one hand, it's a sign of success in some ways. You know, the movement, that is really born out of the struggle, the blood, sweat, and tears of communities, Black, brown, indigenous communities who struggled and resisted with no money, with no resources, but with a lot of power and agency in their communities. And they fought for us to even have such a thing as Justice 40 or the IRA. That is their legacy that we're sitting upon. And some of the movement elders are here in the room that were writing and talking and organizing around this work. You know, Richard, Charles, Sofia. So these are folks who were in the trenches doing the first People of Color Summit. But now we have all these centers and all this interest. And back in January of 2024, this year, we hosted a symposium at the New School. And the purpose of that symposium, in some respects, I'm sitting in an academic center, and I sit on the shoulders of the folks that have centers like Dr. Bullard Center, Dr. Beverly Wright Center. They've been doing it a long time before any funding was available. And much to the peril of their own academic careers, they did that work. And I said, let's call in our peers from academia, like Yale, like Columbia, like all these schools that have centers now. Let's call in our peers and have a conversation with movement partners and other sectors about how to be in right relationship with one another, how to do this important work together in alignment, and how to build just partnerships from the federal government, from philanthropy, and it was getting captured by many universities to do environmental justice work. And that created also a lot of tension points around, who is doing this work? For whom is this funding for? So it was a calling in, and now we're here at a very different moment. And we're having this we're going to continue to have these conversations, calling each other in to reflection and practice. And so I'm going to introduce our panelists because I think they have a lot to say, a lot of wisdom on this subject matter. First is Dr. Sofia Martinez, who's the co-director of Los Jardines Institute. Sofia is, in the words of my daughter, she's an icon. Okay. She's a New Mexican organizer, educator, and media advocate. In addition to being the co-coordinator of Los Jardines in Albuquerque, New Mexico, she's also the co-founder of Voces Feministas, a monthly women of color radio magazine collective highlighting women of color. She has worked at the intersection of social justice, anti-racism, and liberation work for over 40 years. She's originally from northern New Mexico. She's active with concerned citizens of Wagon Mound and Moore County. And she has an impeccable resume of organizing work that goes back, even before the start of the EJ movement, really, the watershed moments. And we have also Dwaign Tyndal, who's the executive director of Alternatives for Community and Environment, ACE, which is an amazing anchor EJ grassroots organization in the Boston area. That's right, you got fans here. Dwaign has over 25 years of professional experience in economic development, community development, and neighborhood development, as well as workforce and youth development. Throughout his professional experience, Dwaign has led capable, diverse teams and worked through very complex public policy and stakeholder groups. And he has shown the power of community-based partnerships to build stronger communities and empower residents and businesses to take active roles in their neighborhoods. And Dwaign has a wealth of experience navigating multi-sectoral stakeholder groups and also large federal and philanthropic funds that come to communities. We also have online, thank you for joining us online, Dr. Denae King. She is the Associate Director of the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice, housed at the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University. Dr. King works on interdisciplinary research for the HBCU CBO Gulf Coast Equity Consortium, the EJ Data to Action Project, Building Civic Engagement During COVID, and the Houston Multi-Hazard Information Hub Project. And her work focuses on EJ projects designed to address community-identified environmental health concerns for underserved people of color communities in Houston, Texas, and the Gulf Coast region. And I don't know if we have Dr. Bhavna with us, maybe. I think maybe she'll join shortly. But we have Dr. Bhavna Shamasundar. She is an associate professor and chair of the Urban Environmental Policy program at Occidental College. And she researches the intersection of environmental health and justice with a focus on chemical exposures faced by low-income communities and communities of color. And she's also the co-editor of the MIT Press Urban and Industrial Environment series. And I know Bhavna also helps run a center at Occidental College focused on urban environmental justice issues out of Los Angeles, where Occidental is based. All right, so we have a mix of panelists here, both academic, sitting in higher academic institutions, and sitting squarely in grassroots community organizations. So I want to start with each of you saying a little bit more about your work, your organizations, where you're grounded, and any sort of highlights. I know you can't go deep into all the history, but any highlights you have about the experiences that stand out for you working across higher education partnerships, all right, and EJ partnerships and how you've navigated that. So we're going to start there. Maybe I'll start with Sofia, if that's okay. Yeah?
I always like to be last because then you can kind of get all the summary, right? But just, well, I was just going to react to the first People of Color Leadership Summit that basically launched the environmental justice movement, right? And I happened to be there, so I consider myself pretty privileged in that I was sharing with Anna that at that time, although there were a lot of, probably Charles Lee was the first publication about environmental justice and its deficits, right? But really there wasn't much literature during that time. There were no books, there were no articles, there were basically nothing that really talked about environmental racism, injustice, or anything, right? After that, basically, there's been hundreds of thousands of articles, okay, and programs and even EJ networks. During the first Environmental Justice Leadership Summit, or the first conference, right, that launched the environmental justice movement, people of color and impacted communities were really at the forefront of that particular first meeting, right? I think that there were three networks at the time: the Indigenous Environmental Network, the Southern Organizing Committee, and the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice. And those three organizations were talking almost on a daily basis, maybe at the least on a weekly basis. So they were really able to direct the direction of the conference, et cetera, right? But today, when we think about it, there's hundreds and thousands of articles and books on environmental justice. There's hundreds of networks. There's hundreds of environmental justice organizations. And I honestly have to say that our communities haven't been empowered by that. Our communities were more empowered at that time, because the reality is the people now making bank on environmental justice, and this is no disrespect to anyone, because I too have my PhD, but at the same time, the folks that are making bank on environmental justice are lawyers, consultants, and some academics, right? And we have to be real about that. We have to be real about that, because this trickle-down effect that we've always had as our history is still going on, especially if we look at the Justice 40 money, right, in the IRA. Well, who's getting it? It's going to be the institutions, right? Because what have been the barriers for us? The barriers have been the fact that most community-based organizations don't have really well-skilled writers, right? Or people that can write federal proposals. Second of all, the biggest impediment has been fiscal management, or having any kind of fiscal umbrella to help organizations, right? So we're back to, although there's going to be a lot of organizations that are well-funded or well-staffed that are going to get some of this Justice 40 money, but the reality is that in New Mexico, that's where I'm from, a lot of that money basically is going to institutions that have never cared about New Mexico. We basically in New Mexico have always been Mora Counties, where I was born and raised, right? In Mora County, we're always in competition with counties in Alabama and Mississippi and McKinley County, which is an indigenous area in New Mexico, for who's gonna be at the bottom of the barrel first. That's where we're coming from. We consider New Mexico, those of us that do a lot of work there, a neo-colony. Okay, so we're not, when I look at the HBUs, I'm really kind of inspired by that, because they may have their own elitism, but they are going out in the community and providing the research, right? In New Mexico, that doesn't happen. It is basically serves this country and the state of New Mexico to keep New Mexicans basically undereducated and in poverty. And right now, the gentrification that's going on, not only in the environmental justice movement, but in our communities, is incredible. And so I guess, you know, the University of New Mexico is the biggest university in the state of New Mexico. It's also the most racist, okay? And we have our North Campus in the University of New Mexico is basically where all the medical institutions are at, right? And they have historically been very racist. But in the last 2 years, all of a sudden we have gotten all this community engagement. People, it's become a bad word for me. I don't even want to hear about community engagement anymore, because it's kind of like a bad word, right? Kind of like diversity, equity, and inclusion. The reality is it's kind of become a gatekeeping kind of situation, right? So we're constantly in battle with our own people, that they felt that they could do something, right? That they felt that they could change something. But the institution is hard, so we have to be strategic when we go into the institutions. It's not just about, well, we don't have to be strategic. If it's about career and publishing, then you don't have to, right? But if you're really about changing, and if you can change, that's going to be a hell of a struggle. I don't care what institution you decide to work in, right? But we do appreciate those folks that are at these institutions that are really putting the research out there to the communities, because research in and of itself doesn't do jack shit for anybody, all right, in the library. okay? Or in your those expensive journals where our literature is never put into, right? So let's be real serious that the work of those of you that are in these universities, your work has to be to get that information back to the community. And again, we know that there's people that will do that and there's others that won't. You know, we know where people are at, you know. And right now, you know, my thing is like, let's not get depressed. Be depressed for a little bit, but come on, let's be serious. I was thinking every single election I thought like, oh, if they win, it's going to be crazy. And granted, this is kind of like the devil incarnate, but we've lived through worse. We've lived through worse. And I just want to say that the University of New Mexico is a land grant university. And when you look at what a land grant university should be about, we can really see kind of like the whole issue with slavery and what they think about us, as well as the boarding schools, right? Because for the land grant institutions, we're about the mechanical arts, you know, agriculture and those kinds of things, not the liberal arts, right? So basically, they were already training us in these institutions for agriculture, for work, for, it's always in there, the military stuff. And New Mexico is a military complex, all right? From being the only state in this country, and we used to be in the nation, the only hazardous nuclear waste dump is in Carlsbad, New Mexico. If you ever want to see a company store in this century, go to a hearing in Carlsbad, New Mexico. People are lined up outside testifying to bring in hazardous waste to New Mexico because it gives them jobs, right? So jobs, again, looking at the labor thing that we just experienced, the discussion on labor, we need to work with labor, and we need to figure out how to do that. But I don't put that in the environmental justice movement, okay? Because we all need to kind of figure out what we're doing. The environmental justice movement, you all need to read the Principles of Environmental Justice and the HEMIS Principles for Democratic Organizing if you really want to do ethical work in environmental justice. Because those, to me, are the ethical documents that should guide the movement, right? And we need to recognize that the environmental justice movement is being gentrified, and how do we come together and really work on that? But then again, at the same time, let's not put it all in the environmental justice movement. I'm kind of tired of reading all this articles that people write, oh, the environmental justice would have been good if they had only dealt with racism. What do you think environmental racism is all about? You know what I'm saying? Maybe you ought to take your study on racism and put it on the community, right? People talk about, oh, the labor stuff. Well, we spoke about labor. That's what just transition is all about. But the labor unions have to step it up too, right? Or people that are working with them. So it becomes a collective struggle. It's not just up to the environmental justice movement to deal with patriarchy. I mean, that's all our struggles, right? All these things are all our struggles. We can't just put it in the environmental justice movement. But anyway, I'll just stop it.
Thank you, Sofia. I told y'all you're in for a treat today, so I'm going to, and hi, Bhavna, for joining us. Dr. Shamasundar is here with us.
We're just sorry, I got the time
That's
wrong.
okay. I'm glad you're able to join us. We're just doing the first round of questions here, so I'm going to turn it to Dwaign to introduce himself and a little bit more and his work.
Yeah, Dwaign Tyndal, Executive Director of Alternative for Community and Environment. We are a neighborhood-based organization in Roxbury, which is a majority Black neighborhood in the city of Boston. I'm originally from Hartford, Connecticut. I'm originally from Black Hartford because I'm a byproduct of Black Hartford. And I came to this work from a Black liberation perspective, right? So when we talk about EJ, I see it as an extension of the civil rights movements. It's the generations of sacrifice and work. As I see this beautiful building in New Haven, and in the 80s, I remember New Haven as being a very Black city. Okay, alhamdulillah. And when I see Yale, as when I see Trinity College, when I see many university system, Northeastern and Roxbury, they don't want to call it Roxbury. They play with these names. you are reminded that these are privately owned institutions. And they behave as corporations relative to our communities and neighborhoods. So before we talk about the invasion of EJ, we could talk about the invasions of our neighborhoods, our housing, our transportations, our resources, our education, not paying taxes. My bad. Not that pilot payment in lieu is in lieu, right? When you see all of that in that context, we need institutional historical memories of who we are dealing with and how they deal with us. Because it's not the professors, it's the administrations and the powerful boards that run these institutions. So you saw what happened with the protests in Gaza. Whoops, my bad. They lined up all these women presidents. You go, and you go. That's not a mistake. That was a process of how they expressed power. And they did that in public, and people was like, what can we do? They did it in public, lined them all up. We don't like what you said. We don't like the way you said it. And you ain't say sorry enough early enough. And you know what? That means all of you are gone. These are the institutions that we are actually dealing with. They are dealing with a concept of power, both national, international, that impacts local communities. So what is the highlights? I turned away quite a few universities that is located Harvard, BU, UConn, because on the economic front, it is a bad deal for neighborhoods. They take 60, 70% off the top, and then we have to compete for the 30% of resources. It doesn't make sense. And one of the evolutions of this process, in closing, that we are the policy experts, meaning the folks in the neighborhoods are the policy experts. And with all this stuff, well, we don't have the people that write grant, that's a power issue. Because when they want money, they go, you didn't hear what I said. They go, and somehow resources appear. They don't ask for 30-page. They just like, can you give me a paragraph? Can you give me a bullet point? I've seen it. Then some, for like $30,000, they want like a 30-page grant. Like, yo, word? Really? That's what you want to do here? So we have power dynamics that happen within our community. And in closing, is the neighborhoods, our residents, our elders, our children, are the policy experts. We could change and we could define the work on the ground. The illusion of policy that's in the air in academia, the State Department, no, it happens on the ground. It always happened on the ground. And you know how policy stopped working on the ground? We say no. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to turn it now to, I was going to ask Dr. King if she could chime in here and share a little bit about her work at the Bullard Center and a little bit about her experiences or reflections in navigating these right partnerships with communities.
Thank you, Anna. I want to first say it is hard to follow Ms. Sofia and Mr. Dwaign, but I will do my best. I am honored to be on a panel with the two of you to discuss some of the concerns related to community collaborations with academic institutions. So I'm Dr. Denae King. I am the Associate Director of the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at Texas Southern University. We are an HBCU in Houston, Texas, and the pillar of the work that we do in the Bullard Center is based on our collaborative efforts with communities in the Houston area, but also along the Gulf Coast. And so all of our work is done with communities leading and developing projects that are designed to address their environmental and climate justice concerns. And so we work transparently together on developing grants, on putting together advocacy plans and action plans. We like to think of ourselves oftentimes as providing technical assistance. And so we do that in a lot of different ways, from helping communities to collect their own data in terms of them developing community air monitoring networks where they own the data, and we work with them to help them to understand what that data means for their communities, whether that looks like us helping them to form allegiance with city and county governments to collect data and help with informing how funding should be used, or what equity looks like as it relates to recovery following disasters. And so it looks different depending on the community and what that community has defined as what's important. But what I want to say is that it is critical that we think about community, and Sofia and Dwaign shared that you all are the experts, not just in policy, but as we think of what needs to be done to help in terms of the health of a community. When we think of things like the extreme weather events that we experience now, and we think about heat and cold and natural disasters and what those solutions look like. So we do a lot of work, and because we are on the Gulf Coast, really helping communities understand how best to prepare for disasters, working with them to get rapid response funds because we have to respond often to disasters. So, the truth is communities are coming up with the solutions that they need to make sure that their residents are safe and that they can recover following extreme heat days, or that they can rebuild after a natural disaster like a Hurricane Beryl that we just experienced last summer, or Hurricane Helene. Communities are the groups that come together and really make sure that people are fed, that they can fix their homes, that they can find a place to shelter in the event of a disaster. And so recognizing that communities have the solutions, that communities have adequate plans already in place that we need to support, making sure that we can help them put the information together to share that with government officials, so that as funding comes down, and we've seen a lot of funding, the Bullard Center is honored to actually receive some of this funding, Justice 40 funding, IRA funding. We've been blessed to receive quite a bit of it as well. But we also recognize that our communities need to be leading us. So our governors' committees consist of community leaders, making sure that when we are able to give some of the funding out. So we're the EPA Region 6 grant maker. We are honored to have received the $50 million grant that we now must award of the $50 million, $40 million to community-based organizations. Our governor's committee consists of community leaders from other regions that can help us make sure that we're doing that process and doing it successfully. We also have an amazing statutory partner. So our partner is our longtime collaborator from one of the neighborhoods in the Houston area. Achieving community tasks successfully is also receiving half of the funds to be able to do that work. So acknowledging people's expertise, both as collaborators, but also acknowledging, as Dwaign said, financially, that these are groups who need their own funding to be able to do the great work that they are proposing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. King. All right, so you can see some of that funding has made its way to some of our partners. Dwaign is also, a recipient, I know. So I'm going to ask Dr. Shamasundra if you can introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about your work and how you're thinking about the partnerships between higher ed and EJ communities that you work with.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good morning. It's 9:30 in Los Angeles, which is where I live and work. I teach at Occidental College, which is a small liberal arts college in Los Angeles. It's in the city. I grew up in LA County in the Antelope Valley, which is a very, if anyone knows Los Angeles, it's a northern edge of the county. My family moved there as immigrants, working there in places where they needed people to work. So I grew up there, and so I have a long my history. I went to school at Yale. I actually got my master's at Yale, and it was there for 2 years, and it was a hard year, very culturally different than California. And then I came back to California. But I've spent my whole professional life here, and I organized before, and I worked a lot on the campaigns for nonprofit organizations before I became an academic. I was increasingly someone who was testifying to stop a refinery or to shut down a refinery, or there was a medical waste incinerator, and I was, often the only woman of color, the only woman really, who was kind of had any expertise or was talking about science, and I realized I needed to get a PhD. So I went to Berkeley and I got a PhD. I was living in Oakland at the time. And so my journey has been a little circuitous. I came back to LA. Oxy is an interesting place. My department, UEP, is a very community organizing focused department. It's a really small and precious place where I've been able to do the work that I want to do. LA, and so I think an example of my work, LA is the largest urban oil field in the country. I think Texas rivals a lot of that, but drilling's been happening in LA for about 100 years, and it happens very close to neighborhoods. And there's an environmental justice pattern in that wells near communities of color are open, they're closer, they don't have protections, they're less regulated. But this pattern has been so long and so persistent as to be invisible. And so I think people just forgot drilling was there. So about a decade ago, an organization, I think the conversation of USC, a community housing development, was across the street from a well right next to USC. And they ramped up oil production like 400% over the course of a year. And then their noses started bleeding and they had headaches, and people said that there's nothing new here. But there was something new, and the community started organizing, and they started doing their own door-to-door health survey, and I got involved then. And so I really worked with them with $25,000 from a small private foundation. We did a self-reported health survey, and it was the first study on oil drilling in Los Angeles about public health. And even though there's 2 giant public health departments and medical schools that operate in Los Angeles. And so the question is why there was no research prior. We could probably talk about that. But and over the next decade, we actually have worked to create a base of information on drilling. And in the communities organized, they started a coalition called Stand LA, Stand Together Against Neighborhood Drilling, Los Angeles. So you have a website, and it's really frontline communities working to shut down fields that are near houses and playgrounds and schools. And last year, the city and county actually voted to phase out drilling over the next 20 years. And it's been a long fight, and it's a pretty big victory. It's rolled back in some ways. There was a lawsuit, and there's questions as to whether and how it can be implemented. But from sort of a very invisible problem to a known visible problem, a lot of the conversation when I started was that there were all the studies were not in California, so how do we know this is a health problem? And obviously that's kind of a ridiculous question, but there was no data, so the assumption of no problem. But there's no data does not mean no problem. It just means there's no data. And so creating the data, I think, is our job. That's what I see the job of our universities, and to put that data to use. I think one study well done and in the hands of a community is far more powerful than a very big resume. And I think I've been really privileged to be at a small place that I can get tenure doing this work. But I think that's not uniform and universal. So thank you for having this panel. I think it's a really important one.
Thank you, Bhavna.
Thank you.
And thank you for giving us a really tangible example, right, of how you can marry these partnerships for real, tangible difference in the community. All right, so this leads into like I'm going to do a twofer a little bit on this question. So one is this question around what are the issues that matter most to communities where a partnership, a trusted partnership between academia and communities could be beneficial. But I want to put that in a little bit of context because there's a lot of false solutions and a lot of research and work that comes out of universities that is actually in direct opposition to what a lot of communities want. In other words, there's a lot of false solutions that get researched and promoted by academics and things that communities have for a long time resisted and put up opposition to. But what are those issues that you see on the horizon or even today, presently, that you would like to prioritize and say to university partners and in university institutions and centers that are supposedly committed to climate and environmental justice? You guys are committed to EJ, right? Help us do X, help us fight X, or do something internally in your institution to push back on these things. So what are some of those things that come to the top of mind when you think about those emerging issues? And then there's a second part of that question, which is, kind of thinking ahead, both environmental justice, climate, universities, especially progressive universities, are all under attack. They're going to continue to be under attack. And so there's great, terrain of threat ahead for all of our institutions, but particularly for EJ communities, particularly for frontline communities. And when we think about those emerging issues that are being prioritized, how are we going to show up for each other, right? How are we going to lean on those partnerships to protect the communities that are most harmed? And so, yeah, a little bit of any reflection that you have when you think about the most important issues, and the opportunity and threat landscape ahead of us. What comes to mind if you have any, sage advice or wisdom on it. And I'll open it up to anyone on the panel, the four of you on the panel who would like to share anything.
Displacement, gentrification, air quality, and strands of justice issues. Those are the three major issues.
Can you say them again, Dwaign? Write this down.
It's displacement and gentrification, meaning 20 years from now, we may not be here. Air quality, which was the precursor of the high fatalities in our neighborhood of COVID. This has happened yesterday. And transit justice, the way you ghettoize the people, you restrict their movement. You hear I said displacement? Air quality and the restriction of movement. What does that sound like to you? Y'all won't have to look over there. It's right here. But the courage is what you do at home. So this is a historical construct for our communities, for our real estate, through our public finance and policy. Then what are our solutions that New Haven, Yale, Harvard, Bridgeport, why don't we apply those set of knowledge or solution sets to our own communities? We have not. Redlining and public health goes hand in hand. We know this. It's not even debatable. They go, yeah, okay. So the challenge to universities is to have the courage to fight against things that you can't get funded for. Or you lose your funding. That's the challenge. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone on the panel who would like to? Sofia or?
Well, I guess for us in New Mexico, the challenges are, again, we're a neo-colony, right? We're the military complex from Los Alamos. If you all have watched Oppenheimer, that's just a Hollywood lie, right? Los Alamos was not a remote, isolated place, okay? There were indigenous people, Chicano farmers on there who through eminent domain lost their land and their livestock was killed, etc. So no, it was not that. There's a movie called First We Bombed New Mexico. Those folks, the Tularosa Downwinders, have done a lot of work in the last 20 years to try and get some protections from the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA, right? Now, how is it that Oppenheimer is in Los Alamos? The bomb gets stacked and basically experimented on in southern New Mexico, again, another remote, isolated area. Well, the hell, it wasn't remote and isolated. There were hundreds of ranchers living around that area, okay? And they have generational cancers. The grandparents, the parents have all died of cancers or have cancers. Right now, Tina Cordova's, who is the director of the Tularosa Downwinders Consortium, her 20-year-old niece now has been identified with thyroid cancer, okay? So this is the issues that we're talking about in New Mexico, right? And that plume, when they set off that atomic bomb, it didn't just stay in New Mexico. It really contaminated all of New Mexico, but that plume basically drifted all the way up to the Midwest. So these are some things that we really need to look at, right? The Tularosa Downwinders have basically were successful in extending the RECA for 2 more years. And they had those 2 years to try and expand it to include New Mexico, because it has always only covered Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, right? And atomic and uranium miner workers up until 1971. So they wanted to expand it to protect environmental atomic workers beyond 1971 miners, and to include New Mexico, right? Because New Mexico is always left out because we're just a bunch of Indians and Mexicans that hardly know how to speak English, and we definitely, cannot have any managerial or any kind of big positions in the University of New Mexico, because you have to get that, you have to understand that these are the peasants, you know what I'm saying? And you have to keep them in that situation. So it's kind of like the W.E.B. Du Bois of the Veil, right? We don't get hired at the universities because we understand the history of New Mexico. So unfortunately, we even get a lot of people of color in New Mexico that are perfectly willing to kind of sit in the universities and treat us the way the system has treated us, right? And a while ago, I've been really coming down on UNM a lot, right? That's my alma mater. It's also, recently, Albuquerque has an F. And sometimes we've gotten a D- for air quality in Albuquerque, okay? But that's how bad it is in Albuquerque. We have an F from the American Lung Association. In December, we had a hearing on the cumulative impacts in Albuquerque looking at air quality, right? There were 2 EJ groups, and there were over 19 industry groups, including the University of New Mexico, which was against us. Obviously, Sandia Labs, right? Second only to Livermore Labs in terms of weapons development, and Kirtland Air Force Base. But the University of New Mexico, right? Why would they be against a regulation that would basically protect the air in New Mexico, right? So we went in, the 2 EJ groups again, we're trying to talk, and there's always little divisions, right? So we ended up going in as 2 separate parties as opposed to 1. But I do have to say this, that the law school at the University of New Mexico has really shown up for environmental justice communities, okay? Over the last 5 years, they have given us research students that have done a lot of research that has really promoted our work in the community. And I went in pro se. I have this history of going to pro se into a lot of things thinking that I'm a lawyer, right? And then I get really embarrassed and shot down, but I'm okay with, being belittled. It doesn't make a difference to me because I know who I am, so it's all right. But I do have to give credit to Gabe Pasternak. He was the director of the law clinic at that time, and he assigned 2 students to us, and they kicked butt. They really kicked butt. We got about this much of a regulation because all the right-wingers came out against us, right, in the city council, et cetera. So as a result of that, lots of lawsuits. We have 2 Title VI complaints from the 2 EJ groups, but we also have in Albuquerque the oldest Title VI complaint from 2014, okay? So that gives you an idea of how much the federal government and anybody else really cares about New Mexico when we have the oldest Title VI complaint in New Mexico, right? So obviously the nuclear and those kinds of issues are major to us. With Justice 40, yeah, we're scrambling for a little bit of monies, but Los Alamos got billions of dollars for pit production, okay? WHIP has gotten a lot of money, the Waste Isolation Pilot Project in Carlsbad, right? So again, it's like we're from cradle to grave in terms of the nuclear cycle, right? So those are issues for us. And now hydrogen, we're gonna be the guinea pigs again in hydrogen, even though our legislature 3 years ago said no to hydrogen. Our governor, who thinks she's a climate queen, but she's actually a climate disaster, right? Doesn't even talk to her own people. She went to Dubai to talk about how she was going to develop a strategic water supply in New Mexico, right? An arid state, right, where we have serious problems with water. So what happened? So we had a hearing in May that was very well attended, so they had to extend it till August. But the hearing was about produced water, which is what our governor is promoting, right? Produced water to basically help out the gas industry in New Mexico. Right now, New Mexico is second in terms of oil production in this country, okay? So there are billions of gallons of contaminated fracked water sitting in those petroleum sites, those oil sites, right? So her idea is like, oh, let's go in and get that messed up water, do pilot projects, pay to do pilot projects with our money, right? And then give it up to us so that we can use it for irrigation and agriculture. We are not watering our vegetables with that shitty water, okay? Number one. Not only is it shitty water, I mean, it would be, even fecal coliform would be better than cadmium and plutonium and all kinds of other shit, right? But, so those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, right? But it's also about providing an alternative energy source for what? For hydrogen. So again, the legislature might not have given her money then, but they're going to give her money pretty soon. Okay, Justice 40 allows for hydrogen, all right? So right now, where are the 3 hydrogen areas that are being considered? In Pruitt, New Mexico, which is an indigenous area. In Cuesta, which is a Superfund site from Molecor. And they're building a facility in Albuquerque, right? So that's the latest thing that we're all fighting for in New Mexico. We belong to and I didn't do this earlier, but because I always go off from the question, right? It was where you're coming from. But anyway, those are our issues. I am a native New Mexican, born and raised there. My family probably came through with Spanish colonizers, probably robbed and raped indigenous women as they came here because the Spanish didn't bring any women, right? So over the years and the decades, there have been love relationships that have evolved, and that's part of who I am, right? But my colonial father probably was a poor foot soldier, right? And so he ended up in a canyon up in northern New Mexico, in a mile-deep canyon, and that's where they were until 1945 when they came out of the canyon to electricity and wheels and things like that. So people may think, oh, that's a bad thing. No, I think that's the most powerful thing in my upbringing because I understand how we can do more with less. I can survive because I know how to work in that environment. I know how to basically know which foods are out there that I can eat even though I didn't plant them. I know where we need to plant in order to do dry land farming. Those are skills that can't be taken away from us, right? And those are skills of survival. Because even the internet is not going to help you, okay? We saw that even in the Soviet Union, right, where they unplugged everybody for a little while. So we need to think about that. When we unplug, what you going to do? So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Sofia. I'm going to give a chance to Bhavna and Denae if they'd like to share any key issues, emerging things you see on the horizon for these partnerships we're going to navigate.
So I'm from Houston, Texas. I think you know, if you're paying attention, our governor in Texas is never been a supporter of environmental justice and certainly not interested in any climate related discussions or solutions. And so in Houston, we have one of the largest ports in the country. It's a 52-mile port that's basically a petrochemical complex. And so air quality is a major concern for fence line communities. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you that those line communities look like us. They're Black and brown communities that were there often before many of these industrial facilities emerged. We also don't have zoning in Houston, Texas. And so without zoning, you can put industrial facilities in our neighborhoods. So we have all kinds of perpetuators of issues related to air quality. So we have what we call concrete batch plants. And so we build lots of highways in Texas. We don't really like public transportation. Everybody has a car, so we have lots of highways. And if you build highways, you need concrete. And so we have these big concrete batch plants. We have lots of metal recycling facilities that are placed in our communities. Not to mention the emissions from the port. And so Sofia talked about receiving a D or F. We will never probably meet ozone attainment, and we always have an F as it relates to air quality from the American Lung Association. So air quality is one of the big fights in the Houston area. Our residents spend a lot of time fighting permits. We have a state agency, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They are tasked with approving permits for these facilities, whether it's a new facility or expansion or renewal. And rarely are those permits denied. So we spend a lot of time working with our communities to submit public comments, to attend meetings where we do public comments, only to find that those permits are probably already approved, truthfully. So communities in the Houston area have really worked to develop their own community air monitoring networks. And we've been able to kind of find funding over the years for them to purchase low-cost air monitors that measure particulate matter, and more recently that measure volatile organic compounds. So things like benzene and toluene, the VTEX complexes, really helping them to understand what it looks like locally. And Dwaign made a great point about what's happening in your neighborhood. So air quality can look different at 2 miles from where you are because of an actual source of pollution. And so the communities have done a great job of getting input, really trying to understand, where should a monitor be placed and why should it be placed there? What are we going to use the data for? Are we trying to use data for enforcement? Are we trying to get information for health outcomes? What is it that we want to do with this data, and who's going to own it? Who gets to use it and really take it for advocacy purposes? They've done an amazing job in some of our collaborative communities of taking that data and now getting the state of Texas to put in regulatory monitors. So those are the really expensive monitors that our communities could never afford. And oftentimes we never saw them actually placed in our communities. So for years we felt like if a regulatory monitor was going to be placed, it was placed somewhere where it would benefit industry and not necessarily the community. And so being able to have those low-cost sensors and a network of them across the city provided opportunities for the state to then see that there were some areas that needed a regulatory monitor. And those areas were our communities. We did letter writing campaigns. We made sure our elected officials understood what the data really looked like. And so communities led on that, and they've been able to get some regulatory monitors in their areas. I hear the comments about displacement and gentrification. We're seeing a lot of that as well. Dwaign talked about this whole notion of renaming communities. And so historical communities that you might have grown up. I'm also a native Houstonian, so I grew up in the area. I know the neighborhoods and the communities. To see names change and know that those areas are contaminated is heartbreaking. I think it also lends for residents having concerns as it relates to you saying to them that their areas are contaminated, or even them knowing and recognizing that those areas are contaminated, yet people are still allowed to develop those areas, to rebuild on those areas. We have a housing complex that was built by the city of Houston, and I encourage you to look this up. That housing complex was built behind an incinerator, and it's been 2 years, and they're unable to move residents in because they knew that it was contaminated before they built it there. So really thinking through, like, we had a highway expansion to come through. We took low income housing, moved people out of it, built new housing for them in a contaminated area. And so all of those residents are now displaced and can't even move back to their networks. That's where their families were. You have to think about, we go to church in those places. We went to school in those places. Our families are there. It's more of just moving away. It's losing your connection. And so displacement is real. Residents are often concerned that if they have to move because of a perceived contamination, are you moving me because you really want this land that my family now has owned for years, or is the land really contaminated? The Bullard Center has been working closely with the Fifth Ward community in Houston. I have ties. I grew up in the area. That area is considered a childhood and an adult cancer cluster. It is a contaminated area because of Union Pacific treating rail yards with creosote. Creosote is a contaminant that we know causes cancer. So there's a whole community of people that have been dying for many years of cancer. But yet we're still seeing the EPA is now in doing sampling. That's been happening. They're doing soil sampling, vapor. They're doing a little water sampling. So trying to get an understanding of how widespread the contamination may be. So we're telling residents, you're not safe there. It's contaminated. Residents fought for EPA to come in. They already know that the area is contaminated, and they've lost so many of their loved ones and neighbors and friends. Yet development continues. So what does that say to those residents when you think about displacement? If you tell me my land is contaminated, but you then allow people to build $300,000 and $400,000 townhomes, then is the land really contaminated? And so these are some of the things that are emerging in Houston and have been, in many ways, long-standing fights. But I feel like the gentrification and displacement part is becoming more and more prominent. We're also seeing that in our projects along the Gulf Coast. So we work in Houston, New Orleans, Gulfport, Mobile, and Pensacola. And unfortunately, we see the same thing across all of our communities in those states. So those are just some of the things that I'm seeing.
Thank you, Dr. King. Yes. Bhavna, do you want to share a little bit about what
I can say something very quickly because I think everyone has covered this really well. We see some of the same, these issues of these, I think, they're so interconnected. Transit injustice, displacement, poor air quality. And I think I'm just going to add two things to this, which is sort of I think people have this idea of California as very progressive, you saw we went right in this election. We actually lost on many propositions that, were really quite disheartening. But that the contradiction between sort of a state that tries to be a climate leader visually and publicly while making these very entrenched, problematic decisions, like at very local levels. So I see that we have to really fight, like at the very local, very granular level, and organize to support the ways the science and the data that is coming out, and also to support community. So I think academics supporting the organizing is maybe kind of front of mind for in LA. What's coming is the Olympics. There is going to be a lot of money pouring into the Olympics. And people are very worried, especially about transit justice. How are people getting around a car-centric city? Where are those dollars going? And will people be displaced? There are many communities when the space shuttle was brought, for view in the museum in downtown, that a shuttle went through South Central Los Angeles, which was named South LA at some point, and the community then changed it back to South Central. And trees were cut down in order to move this shuttle that would then be for public view, right? So we see that local neighborhoods are having to bear the burden of sort of something that's seen as a general public good. And so I think, how do we navigate those trade-offs and get ahead of them? And I think that's a really huge problem. There's a gondola currently being funded by the former owner of the Dodgers, called Frank. His name is Frank McCourt, and he wants to drop a gondola into Dodger Stadium so people can take this like air gondola into the Dodger game. And that is a huge problem because the LA, there's a county park that Chinatown fought for a very long time called the LA State Historic Park. That part of it would be reclaimed for this gondola project. So there's these ridiculous transit projects that are proposed, funded, bankrolled by very rich people. And then this metro says, well, there's no public tax dollars going into that, so we'll just allow it to go forward. But the trade-offs are, massive. Like, what does that mean, actually, that there are no tax dollars going into? That's not true. That doesn't happen. So I think organizing against some of these projects and actually forcing, the city to think about what they're sacrificing in order to make these happen. I mean, the other big issue in Los Angeles is the unhoused issue, and it's kind of overshadows almost everything. And with the heat burdens that faced LA this last year, and it's going to just get worse. Climate in LA, it looks very different all over the country, but climate impacts here are that we have many more days above 100 degrees. And where people go, where they seek public or private protections, like I think that distribution of resources, I think is what we are going to keep our eye on, is how these these dollars that are coming in for the Olympics or solving big crises, the distribution matters. And it's hard sometimes to see it. And I think that those are kind of the big issues that lay on top of everything everyone else has already talked about.
Thank you, Damavna. Gondolas in LA, this is crazy. All right, well, I think we're going to try to wrap up with just a few insights from each of the panelists, words of wisdom as we go, and leave a little bit of time. I think we have a little bit of time for just questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask each of you. We have a lot of maybe students in the room, maybe folks from higher ed that joined us, or organizations. Maybe you're coming here from an organization, an EJ organization or otherwise. And maybe, we're feeling a little bit more than a little bit down and grieving this moment. But, when I first got to the conference yesterday, Sofia reminded me, we have, Dwaign too, we got work to do. We have work to do, so much work to do. We always did, but now more than ever. And how are we going to do that work together? How are you going to do that work in right relationship with one another? So maybe if you could offer any advice, guidance, tips, what would you tell your friends, your colleagues, and this community here are the important things to get to work on? And you're going to just, any one or two little nuggets you want to share before we close out the panel?
Any work you do, any institution you are in, connect it back to your neighborhood. You do not have the excuse to say that I work here, so I can't. That's coward's language. These organizations was developed in churches of basements, on kitchen tables, on the corner, on the block. Connect the work and the resources back to the neighborhood. I think that's one thing. The other thing is a more selective appeal to the black men in this room. Over the past 30 years, I see less and less black men in this space and in these community spaces. And in the next 30 years, more than likely, we may not be in these spaces. And I was part of a generation that I was a part of endangered species. And guess what? They was right. So it's almost, we are used to not seeing us, meaning black men, in these spaces. And for those of you who are here, wherever you land, remember your responsibility to our families and our neighborhoods. And I look and count when I see us. And I know I see less and less of us. And that's not random. we understood in the 80s what the crack epidemic, mass incarceration would do to our population. So as a brother that getting very gray in his beard, I'm also looking for the next generation of black men leadership. You will never be accepted. You will never be comfortable. That's a harsh reality, but your responsibility have not changed. So alhamdulillah, thank you.
Sophia, you want to share any guidance or wisdom?
Well, I guess what I want to share is that we have a lot more resources and a lot more people than we did when the first Environmental People of Color Leadership Summit was held, right? So, but then there's also been a lot of things that have actually been imposed in our communities to divide us, right? So, yeah, we do need to grieve and we need to mourn and we need to talk about healing in our communities. Those are things that we really need to do because they're part of surviving, right? But the research also shows us that life is a series of mountains and valleys, right? So we can't stay in that depressive state for too long. We can't be in there, oh, I'm so wounded, I need the healing, because that works for colonialism, okay? I mean, we may need some healing, but, you know, even when you're in the hospital, you need to start moving and getting out, right? So let's not get caught up in this whole thing of working so much in our wounds, okay? And let's get out of the silos of all of us doing and, you know, picking on other people and what they're doing. Let's kind of realize that we have to build a movement together. And it's not going to be about our individual issues. It's going to be about people coming together. And that's kind of, again, we need to get out of our silos. We need to really question all this identity issues that have come up. They're important, but they can also be our downfall. So I really want us to think about that, you know, because how much time do we spend on those things that are really not helping us get stronger and not helping build the movement, right? And again, the three things that we always talk about in Los Jardines Institute is remember where you come from. I don't care how high you get. Remember where you come from. Remember on whose shoulders you stand, okay? Because there has been a venue created for people to speak out. So who created that venue? So don't forget that, okay? Remember on whose shoulders you stand. And then also give back. All the resources that we have now in terms of people and being at these ivy towers, right? All that needs to go back. The research and the data needs to go back. And I do want to thank Dr. King. We've been doing a virtual J40 kind of gathering for the last 2 years, right, in our communities in New Mexico. And Dr. King was there, and we've had a lot of folks basically come in and really share ways that we can receive technical assistance, et cetera. And there's some issues with all this stuff, right? But there's also some opportunities. We're very happy about the Bullard Center and the Deep Dow Center for Environmental and Economic Justice that have been set up as Tic Tacs. We're not so happy with our Tic Tac in New Mexico, okay? They are there to promote hydrogen, to promote Los Alamos, and that is not a Tic Tac that anybody should be proud of, okay? So again, let's hook it up. Let's hook it up, get into those deep, nasty discussions that we don't want to have, right? The ones that are dividing us. We need to be brave in really talking about those issues and how they're dividing us. It's not just about the identity stuff. It's about how is that identity working to move movement forward, okay? So, and I'm a Chicana, just so that you all know. And Chicanos are kind of an invisible people, right? What do you all know about Chicanos are like, what's that guy, Ted from Texas, and that other guy from Florida, what's his name? I forget his names because when I don't like somebody, I just forget about them. But they are not who represent Latinos in this country, right? Those right-wing guys that are going over there to Cancun and stuff like that, they are not the ones who represent us. And I just want to say that, and Chicano power.
Yes, okay. Woo!
I'll go next, Anna. So I want to encourage us to really bring in our youth. And I say that because I'm obviously at an HBCU. We are tasked with training the next generation of leaders. And in the Bullard Center, we have graduate students, we have undergraduate students. We also have a summer program where we train HBCU students from across the country on issues related to environment and climate. And so I encourage that we really think about educating our youth, informing them, mentoring them. So intergenerational kinds of projects where we are, kind of teaching them what this movement looks like and how best to approach it, helping them to really think about how to give back and to they have a lot of energy and they're feisty and they're ready. And so helping them to really kind of frame that and make sure that they can use it in a productive way. I know that we are all concerned, as we are certainly concerned as well about what this leadership change looks like. But the truth is, Sofia and Dwaign have said it, we've done this for a long time with no money, and we're successful. As grateful as we are for the money that we've been able to receive in the last couple of years, we will continue to do this work whether we have money or not. And so those are my suggestions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be quick. I think maybe for folks who want an academic career, I think the thing I would say is that you have to reject some of the ideas of prestige that come from the job that you have, and really push against that and not value them and value other things. And I think that's the only way you do this work. Like, you have to do community-based research, thinking about building community and prioritizing that. And everything else, publishing, having an R1 job or whatever, a tenure track or getting tenure, has to come second. Like, I just don't think that. And I think if you do that, you can, I feel like I've gotten tenure, I've gotten other job offers. Like, I think that, you don't have to sacrifice yourself. I'm not saying that but you also have to prioritize some things differently than others. And it is possible. And the second thing is to, community building is hard, important, hard, long-term work. It's not like you write a grant and then that relationship goes away, but it's resilient and it's long-standing. And I think that's, I teach my students, and when I work with them, like, how do you create a project? It's like you're thinking, the next decade. You're not thinking 2 years. And so that I think is a structural change and a brain change that I think a lot of universities don't teach. But something kind of to build on. Thank you, Anna, for your work too.
Thank you. All right. And I'll put in a plug. We did have the tishmancenter.org. If you go on our website, you'll see the Centering Justice Symposium. We have a whole resources and toolkits there for how you center relationships and partnerships on community-based research and academic and movement partnerships. We also have a manifesto, because in January, when we were all gathered together, the folks popped up and said, we need a manifesto. We have guidelines and toolkits and MOUs, and that's all great. But in this moment, in this room right now, we have a set of demands, and they're political demands. They demand action. And so we created a manifesto, a Centering Justice Manifesto. Some folks have signed on. You can check it out. I think you can still sign on. But I think it's another powerful reminder. Every time we gather together, it's an opportunity to carve out community and space to make a set of demands and forward motions together and advance our work together. So it's not just networking and listening to panels. It is really about building community every chance we get. So we are going to be together again in March. We're going to do another Centering Justice Symposium at the University of Arizona with our partners at the Indigenous Resilience Center in Tucson, Arizona, the first week of March. And I invite all of you who are interested and deeply committed to this work of partnerships to join us there in March for that. I hope our panelists will be there with us to grow our community of practice and move ourselves forward in this, what is going to be difficult terrain ahead. But we can do this work together. I know we can. We've done it in the past, and we're going to continue to do it in the future. So I don't know if we have time. thank Michael and Gerald for inviting us to take some space here at their conference. And I don't know if we have time for Q&A from the audience, but I'll defer to Michael's judgment about whether or not 5 minutes? Okay, all right. And thank you for letting us bring the Centering Justice conversation here to the conference. And I guess with 5 minutes, let's take like one of those things where we take 2 or 3 questions at once, and then we'll see if the panelists can jointly respond. So quite a few questions. We have one here, one there, and one here. Okay.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My question is, and my name is Gentry, for New Mexico in the hydrogen development, one of the first things that you mentioned was how community engagement has kind of become like a dirty phrase. Could you speak a little bit to how you came to that conclusion and maybe how you're seeing that play out in New Mexico, especially given the hydrogen development and related community benefit plans?
We're going to take, Sofia, two or three questions together, and then we'll answer them all together.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing all your experiences. I'm from Bolivia, and I was wondering if you can also speak about some potential collaborations beyond the United States borders, because some of the climate actions even have effect beyond the borders, right, in our territories as well. Just yesterday in the finances session, I heard about how we can, or the carbon credits mechanisms can be used to fund maybe environmental justice fights, but those carbon credits are also dispossessing peoples in other lands beyond this country. And I also wanted just to encourage to think of our peoples like beyond the borders of this country when we think about the struggles here. And yeah, thanks everyone for all the job you do.
Maybe we'll take one more and then we'll try to answer them all.
Hello, I'm Sam. Question for Dwaign, but broadly everyone as well. You mentioned earlier that most important thing you could do is connect it back to your neighborhood and the place you live, the people you live alongside. You also mentioned air quality, which is interesting. You said you were from Hartford. I've done a little bit of activism work in Hartford. I know they've been doing testing on Hartford public schools. There have been PCPs detected in the air, and so there was a huge campaign around public testing for people who attended these public schools to get their lungs checked for these PCBs. I want to ask what other ways, what it looks like to connect communities back to neighborhoods, examples of what that might be, and just, broad ideas on that.
Okay, so we have 3 questions, one on community engagement, one on connecting the U.S. struggles with global South struggles in other parts of the world, and one on what does connecting back to the communities look like or could look like. So if any of the panelists would like to chime in on any of those questions. So we have 2 minutes left? Yeah, I like time check. Michael will get the hook out for us when it's time.
Yeah, I did talk about the fact that, it's like, okay, I was talking about North Campus at the University of New Mexico, right? We've never seen anybody in North Campus in our communities, right? But now all of a sudden they've hired a lot of brown people and people of color, not just brown folks. And, well, I guess let me give you an example. There was this guy that actually called us because he was going to apply for a job at the Environmental Health Department of Albuquerque, who sabotaged our air quality hearing, right, our cumulative impacts hearing. And he basically was real honest. I need a job, I have health issues, I need insurance, blah, 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 right? And basically I told him, bro, go in there, see what you can do, try and get all your health issues set up as quickly as you can, and then don't take it personally, because the next hearing that we have, we're probably going to kick your ass from the community, and so don't take it personally. And then probably you're not going to be able to work there more than a year. So make sure you get all your health stuff dealt with by then, right? So this is kind of what people should do, right? But unfortunately, people that are working in those diversity, equity, and inclusion centers, and because they're at the universities, right? And in these positions of outreach, or what is that again, community engagement, it's hard. I feel for people of color that take those jobs because I think they have good intentions. But you have to understand that if you take a job in the institution, you're going to be in the belly of the beast, so you better have a real clear strategy of why you're in there, okay? We also talk about having an inside and outside strategy. The environmental justice movement would not really have had all the gains it did without the fact that we had some inside people in the EPA and every place else giving us a lot of information about what was going on, right? So, you know, we really have to understand our roles. And we're okay if you want to be a careerist and go over there and we'll be, you know, demonstrating against you as well as anybody else. But at the same time, you know, we're not against people having good jobs and good salaries. But we are against anybody who's a sellout. All right.
Connecting our work back to our neighborhoods. You know, I went to Harvard schools, so I don't know. Man, it's done. I'm just being real, but that's the harsh reality. Wherever you are located, try to bring it back to the ground. And that's the example, because that is just the beginning stage of the level of criminality that this system has towards our community. It wasn't a secret. Someone knew, and they continued. This is consistent across the board in frontline communities. So again, this is the work. Bring it back to the neighborhoods. Allies, bring it back to your neighborhoods. Right? Thank you.
I just want to respond to the sister from Latin America. We have done a lot of work in our work, and many people here, in terms of what's going on not only in Latin America, but Palestine, Africa, right? But for me, the thing is we need to, and as people in Cuba, Nicaragua, and places that we've gone to have always told us, because there's always a white person that says, what can we do to help you, right? And people in all those countries have always said, you know what you can do to help us? Help yourself. Because when you help yourself and you get shit together in your country, all of us are going to be better off. And I'm sorry to...
Yeah, and Denae or Bhavna, if you want to add anything before we close out.
I'll just add that authentic community engagement is something that's long term, and it's hard work. It's showing up consistently. It's making sure that community speaks for themselves, which is an EJ principle. It's making sure that if you are in an academic situation, that you take a step back and you let community lead. And so it's a little different from the community engagement that we are seeing with the hydrogen hubs and ammonia and those different kinds of requirements from DOE. Those are to me, in many ways, a checkbox. Those are creating community benefits agreements that often aren't even legally binding. And so while there may have been good intention to bring that part into the DOE funding, it hasn't really demonstrated true community engagement where community leaders come together and really talk about what's needed and what should be included. And so I think there's a difference between the two, and we just need to make sure we keep pointing that out, that we are looking for authentic community engagement.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you for this conversation. I appreciated it. I think it's super important to have these consistently.
Thank you so much. I want to give a big round of applause and shout out to our panelists, amazing panelists.